Morning. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Jeff Coltrane. I am Deputy Policy Director and Senior Education Advisor to Governor Cooper. Thanks so much for joining us for this important discussion on public education. We've got a superstar panel, as you will clearly see. I'm going to try and do my best to just get out of their way and let them talk. But first, I wanted to give you a little bit of background. I am a public school graduate. I graduated from Trinity High School in Randolph County. I was a public school teacher for 5 years in Durham, North Carolina. Both of my kids attended public schools in Durham. Married to a public school teacher and a public school graduate as well. So really passionate about our public schools and the value that they bring to our communities, the importance they have to our economy, to our lives here in the state. And Governor Cooper, of course, is also a public school graduate, as well as a strong supporter of our public schools. And he declared 2024 the year of public schools and has been going around the state this year, highlighting the great things that our public schools are doing and making sure that people are aware of some of the threats that we're facing, unfortunately, to our public schools. North Carolina has some of the best public schools around. We have the most National Board certified teachers in the nation. More than 8 in 10 of our school-age children attend public schools across the state. Last year, our students earned 325,000 workforce credentials in that year. It was the highest ever. And more than a third of high school graduates each year actually leave 12th grade with at least one college course for credit, which means they're stepping out the door to community college or university already prepped and ready with credits in their pockets. But unfortunately, despite all of these successes, our public schools are really at risk. We rank near the bottom in spending for public education, $5,000 less than the national average. And unfortunately, the General Assembly is not proposing to invest more in our public schools, but actually to divert $4 billion in taxpayer money to private school vouchers that go to unaccountable private schools that are not required to serve all students, that are not required to provide transportation. They're not even required to tell us what they teach or how students perform. And the future of our state goes to class every day in a public school. And we need to be making investments in those public schools, lifting them up and making sure they're as strong as they can be. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So thanks again for joining us. And I'm actually going to pitch a question to each of our panelists here and have them introduce themselves instead of me doing it. So we'll first start with Monica. Monica, what brings you to this panel today, and why is public education in North Carolina so important?
Okay, I think we're on. Thank you very much. Again, my name is Monica Johnson-Hostler. Very similarly, we're neighboring high school rivalries. I'm a public school graduate, K-12 from Thomasville City Schools, which I tell people all the time because I think it's relevant because I serve on the largest school district board here in Wake County. And I think that juxtapose my position of the importance of public education, of having grown up in an inner city, small, rural, poor school district. My husband's also a public school graduate. Our daughter graduated from Wake County Public Schools, where my husband still teaches in Wake County Public Schools. My life's work has been committed to education being a public good and an equalizer for kids like me. I'm a daughter who was raised by a single parent and my maternal grandparents. I can sit at every table and be invited to tables because my public school education prepared me for that. And I think it's important to know it's also the hard lessons I learned being a Black girl in a community that was quote unquote academically gifted. And I also had some challenges. And so I bring to that both my successes, but also the challenges that I endured. And I believe that that has made me a good school board member for Wake County Public Schools because I'm able to speak to both the things that we have the ability to change lives every single day, every time a kid walks in our schools. And more importantly, I've also, once I got on the school board, realized the importance of being invested in our early childhood education. So for me, now I see my role as someone who's committed to education from birth until they're ready to not be in school. Because if you live in rural communities, Thomasville, when the factories closed, people went to our community colleges. And so for me, I do look at education across the full spectrum.
Thank you so much, Monica. And one housekeeping item I forgot to mention, our representative from our Council for Women passed out some cards, and we're going to have some time at the end of the session for some Q&A from you. So make sure you're writing down any questions you have. They're going to come around 11 o'clock to collect those. So just be on the lookout for that. Letha, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So I am Letha Muhammad. I use she, her pronouns. I'm co-executive director of Education Justice Alliance, which is based here in Wake County. We are a community-based organization that builds leadership with working class Black and Latinx parents and young people with an express mission of dismantling the school to prison pipeline and school to deportation pipeline. So that brings me here, but even above and beyond that is I'm a mother of Black children who have all now graduated Wake County Public Schools. And my first daughter in first grade entered Wake County Public Schools, and I entered the school right along with her. And that started my own advocacy as a mama, recognizing that unfortunately, although our public schools are necessary and a public good that I believe deeply in, there are children that look like my children and some of your children who don't always get equitable access to all they need in that public education space. So I'm here to represent those families, my own families and my own experiences, and lift up the necessity of public education that is equitable and fair and non-discriminatory for all young people.
Leah.
Hi, friends. I'm Leah Carper. I'm the 2022 North Carolina State Teacher of the Year. And and I love doing that. That's like my favorite thing. I taught high school English in Guilford County schools for 15 years, and I am a mother of 3 students who are currently in the public schools of the great Guilford County. I have a high school senior. Everybody mourn with me. I'm on a struggle bus. I'm telling you right now. I know we have a bus driver shortage, but this bus is running. Okay. And I'm on it. I have a child who's an athlete. I have 2 children who are AIG, and I have a child with special needs, who is a person with autism and ADHD and anxiety and a whole bucket of things. And when I think of equity that we were just talking about here, I think about equity not just for students of color, for students who grew up in poverty like myself, but also for students who have special needs, whether they be academic, social, or any of them, or physical needs. And so I think about that a lot. I'm here because public school is the right thing for everyone. We are the only group that has to say yes to everybody who walks in the door. Like if they come in, we say, yes, we will serve you and we'll do our very best to give you all the love that you need. And so we need support to be able to do that. We don't get to be picky and choosy about who our customers are. Everyone gets to have this sound and basic education that I truly believe in. I went to community college. That was the only avenue for me. And I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college and get a master's degree and all of the things. And it was because there were public school educators who looked me in the face and said, Leah, first of all, wake up. What you doing? Are you hungry? Here's something to eat. Here are some shoelaces for your shoes because you don't have any. And here are the things that you need. Here's a pencil. And get moving, kid, because you have potential. And I believed in that potential because that was the people who were feeding me the potential or the things to believe in were the people in schools. So it was no wonder I wanted to become one of them, right? They built me to be something great. So I'm really grateful. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Leah. Mike.
So you'll notice I sat on this end of the panel for a reason, as far away from Jeff as possible. So I would be the last person to ask all these questions. But then Leah came and sat beside me, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to follow Leah now after every question. And she's apologizing. Sorry. So my name is Mike Hawkins. I am from the western part of the state. I'm from Brevard. I own a small business. I'm a small business owner in Western North Carolina. Also a longtime elected official. I spent 16 years as Transylvania County Commissioner, spent 10 years as chair of Transylvania County Board of Commissioners. And so when you talk to me about or ask me, why do I think public education is important? I think of it through the two prisms of being a business owner and being an elected official. From the business perspective, at least my experience in Transylvania County with Transylvania County schools is the young people who come out of Transylvania County schools are well equipped, technically well equipped to do the technical duties of almost any job. And of course, K through 12 works in conjunction with community college and with other types of higher education or other types of technical training to do that. But it does do that, and it does that very well. I think the other thing from a business owner, though, is I think sometimes we get hung up too much on the technical component. I think one thing that public schools do and do really, really well is the soft skill component. The things about having young people come together and learn values. And by values, I mean things like curiosity, which is very important for a good staff person. Being curious is a huge advantage. As a boss, I want someone who is curious. I want someone who's tolerant, who has been around everyone in the community and understands the different components, the different needs of everyone in the community. I want someone with work ethic. I want someone who understands teamwork. And public schools do all of those things and do all of those things very well. From an elected official's perspective, the value of public schools in any county, and particularly in a rural county, and I'll talk about this more with some of the other questions, but public schools are really the community centers. They give a sense of place to so many places in North Carolina, particularly rural communities. Also, not incidentally, in most counties in North Carolina, the public school system is the largest employer in the county. So it's a direct economic development benefit. Sometimes that gets characterized negatively by some people, saying, well, it's just bloated. It's why are we spending all this? We can cut. My response to that as an elected official has always been, listen, what do we do that's more important than educating our young people as a society? What do we do that's more important than educating our young people? And so we should spend money on it, and we should devote resources to it and personnel to it. So that's me. Yeah.
Thanks so much, you all, for those great introductions and what brings you to the panel. And Mike, I know you started talking about this a little bit, but what is it that makes our public schools strong? And now we're going to make Leah follow Mike. So we'll have superstar following superstar here. So Mike, I'm going to start with you. What makes our public schools strong? You started talking about this, but give us a little more.
You know, and again, to me, part of the strength of public education in North Carolina, but everywhere, is that while the structure is similar, the structure is the same across the state, every county's public school system is different. There are differences because we serve different needs. The particular needs in Transylvania County are not going to be exactly the same as in Guilford or in Northampton or in Cleveland County. And so we have to tailor our delivery product. We have to tailor what we do to serve the community that we live in. One of the strengths in Transylvania County is, and I touched on it, is the community orientation. And this is true across the state. An example would be meals. Leah talked about meals. We work very hard in Transylvania County, and I'm sure that almost every county, if not every county, does this as well. In the summertime, we worry about kids who are out of school who have food insecurities. And so we work really hard through the public school system to try and make sure that those kids have some stable type of food source. We deliver, and we're very proud of that. We set up structures so that these kids in downtimes can have access to technology, to not just internet, but technology. So to me, when I think about strength in Transylvania County, anyway, I think first to that kind of community orientation, uh, and really devotion to community that helps us with sense of place. I'm going to say sense of place a lot today, but sense of place is so important, especially in rural North Carolina.
Thanks, Mike. Our public schools are the backbones of our communities all around the state. So, Leah, what makes our public schools strong?
I mean, I have to say our educators make public schools strong, right? Like our educators are passionate professionals who are experts in their fields, who are trained, who know what's best for kids and understand the neuroscience of how students learn and want to get in there and work their magic every single day. So great educators. But the thing that makes public school also the thing, not but, the thing that makes public schools strong, I would say our partnerships. So public schools are only as strong as the partnerships that we have with our families, with our community, with our county commissioners, with our legislature, with our everybody, with everyone has to work together to support public schools. And that's what makes the best type of public school. So for example, if you have a public school who understands about the summer meal programs and the summer SNAP programs that are Sunbucks, things like that, and we're making sure that students have access to all of the things that our great state provides for them, it only makes our school stronger because y'all, we all know kids can't learn if they're not fed and they're not clothed and they're not homed. It's very difficult for them to, learn the quadratic equation. I don't even know if I ever learned it.
That's why you teach English.
Exactly. I don't even know who Pythagoras is, but good for him though. Uh let me shift my angle here. But that was a very intelligent joke. But we are but we really are only as strong as the partnerships that we have. And that's why conversations like this are so important. What are your agencies doing to support public schools? How can the Department of Transportation support our schools? That's something that I do in my district. We got them like our, local busing to help support our students who need buses from after school programs, so they can now use their student ID to get on buses at no cost to them. How are we all working together to support the business of school? That's what makes our schools strong. That and like a slew of other things that my besties right here are going to tell you about. And take it.
Letha, go ahead.
I think what makes public schools strong is, yes, all the things that you all have said, but I also have to think about the young people who enter into our public schools, who come into our public schools with different experiences from different communities that actually are adding value to the school space because of their difference. And public schools that create the space to celebrate and applaud that difference and allow a young person to blossom in that space is what makes public schools strong. Public schools that allow parents entry into the building to see what's going on, to lend their expertise or their advice is what makes public schools strong. Elected officials like Monica that serve on boards of education that create space for parents and for young people to show up at the school board meetings, to have conversation and dialogue about what isn't working in our public schools and what actually could be better that makes our public schools stronger is another aspect of what makes public schools strong. So it's really that it's a democratic process, right? That should celebrate in its process, in its the way that it operates all of the things that people bring into that space. And I have to echo excellent educators and administrators, right? Who actually create the environment in their schools where young people feel empowered to speak up, to celebrate, to challenge, because we want those young people then to come and contribute in our world, in our society, in that same aspect. So public schools is like the breeding ground, the testing ground for where we develop those aspects of leadership in our young people so that we actually have a better world when they come out of schools.
I don't know what to say other than amen, amen, says the Baptist Church. I mean, I certainly echo all of those things. And thank you, Letha. For me, part of running for the school board was to be able to say that our schools are communities. They should be reflective of who we are and what we want to see. And so Wake County has 200 schools. And so I always say we have 200 mayors. Really, right? And so a part of living in community means everyone has say. Everyone is bringing their full selves to this, whether you like it or not. Our young people are bringing their full selves in those buildings, unless we create a community where that isn't okay. And for me, what makes public schools strong is in those cases, there's always folks, and all of you need to get Aletha and EJA in your community because some of us can get really comfortable in school becomes very rote, right? You turn 5, you have to go to kindergarten in the state, and right there's this system. But what makes public schools strong is it is a system that should be collective. And so I really bought into the 4 Cs in Wake County. My daughter did not, who did graduate from Wake County Public Schools. She is like, I never remember the 3rd or 4th C, mom. But I think, and Mike spoke to this. I'm also an employer. Soft skills are important. So when I came on the school board, we're committed and still do infuse the 4 Cs. That's collaboration, communication, critical thinking, and creativity. Those are all things that you need to survive and thrive as successful adults. So if we start to infuse that in kindergarten and say, you know what? This kid right here is coming to us with 3,000 less words. How do we let them use their creativity to express their brilliance as well? That's what makes public schools strong is when we lean into the values that make community strong. Because if we don't teach our babies to be strong in those buildings and resilient, because we, educators, boards, family members, and community partners, because partnership was very much so spoken of, and we're fortunate in Wake. But again, I always think about Thomasville doesn't have those same resources. And so what is it that I can be doing? And trust me, I feel like I'm also partly on Thomasville School Board too, because I'm always telling them, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you talk to these people? Because I believe all 115 LEAs should be thinking the same because I grew up in Thomasville, but I live in Raleigh. So while I may be invested in my school community, I'm eventually going to be a product of our great state. And so the investment isn't just what I do in Wake County. And that's what makes public schools strong is I recognize what we do in Wake has a direct correlation to Thomasville and the other 114 LEAs that I don't represent, because that's what schools do is create community and remind us that it is reflective of the real world. So when we start to see people siphon off of our public school students and teachers and administrators and community, we are divesting from our public good of making sure, definitely the money. We we are we are diluting a community that, guess what? You might remove that kid from our school, but the community that they live in is still the community that they live in. Right. And so if we don't have those real community conversations that is reflective of who we are and what we believe, and I know that's none of you in this room because you would be here otherwise, is we won't have strong public schools if we don't believe that our schools are reflective of our community. That's who we are, and that's what makes us strong. And I believe that's what makes everybody up here strong who is a product of public education.
Well said. I sensed a theme there. What makes our public schools strong is that they're public schools. It's community, right? They're responsive to our community. They represent our community. They are that they are our community. As we talked about earlier, though, our public schools are at risk now from a number of different threats. And Lee, I'm going to start with you this time. Can you share a little bit about what some of those threats are from your vantage point?
Know anything that you're talking about. Say more. That's crazy. Wow, loaded. Our public schools are under many threats. I'll speak from the teacher angle and let y'all speak from other angles. Educators feel like they are under attack a lot. Does anyone in here know an educator who has been under attack or seen it on the Facebook? Awful. Educators feel like they're under attack, that every choice they make is under a microscope, and that pressure and the lack of support financially and in other ways causes great educators to leave. And we are losing educators because they do not feel supported by their great community, or and more so because they're not being compensated for the great talent that they have. And so I worry a lot about our system and about our students and the value of education that they're getting. We have such a great product and we have been trained and we are experts. But when we're not supported and when a company calls and y'all, they love a teacher because we can do anything. We can make it out of craft paper
Yeah.
and it's going to look real good.
That's right.
Okay. Like it's going to look real good. And they call and they say, hey, we'll give you all of this plus paid maternity leave plus all these things. It's hard to say no when you're trying to raise a family. I just a little sidebar. I got a master's in it to be a principal. And so I carry a principal's license. We're not driving that bus either. Absolutely not. But I felt like I had to. I grew up with a single mom who had no choices and I wanted to be a teacher. But if I was a single mom, if anything happened to my sweetheart of a husband, if anything happened to us, I can't support my family on teacher salary. And so I have gone into debt again. Student loan, if anyone wants to pay it off, call me. Gone into debt again, just in case, right? Because there are no career avenues for educators where they feel secure in their work. And that's a tragedy. Other states pay teachers a wage where they can afford a home. You guys, I bought a house. I'm a homeowner, but that's because I went through a government program and bought my house. It's a HUD house. It's a foreclosed home and it was a program for teachers and it was only around for a short period of time. That's the only way I could afford a home. And we could do more programs like that, or we could pay teachers more. And we could pay teachers more. The narrative around teachers indoctrinating students is a huge thing that we're being under attack for. Y'all, I wish I could. I wish I could come to class on time, stop kissing your boyfriend in the hallway. Indoctrination. I wish it worked. I was a okay teacher, but I could never quite get the indoctrination down. If you could send me training, that'd be great. So that's not happening in schools. And there's a lot of narratives about things happening in schools that aren't actually happening in schools. And that's what's making people leave public schools, is because the narrative around what's going on is not the truth about what's going on. So I encourage everyone, if you're hearing something negative about your school, contact your school before you contact the news, and find out what's really going on. And those partnerships that we were talking about, those relationships, your school board is willing to work with you, talk with you, your educator is willing to talk with people. Don't attack them publicly, have a conversation privately, and let's get to the bottom of it. So all of that's to say that's something huge, I think, that is how education is under attack.
Thank you. And we know a lot of schools now are facing shortages of teachers. And so we've got to do a lot more, not only to take that threat away, but also to help support them. Before I turn it over to Mike, it's almost 11 o'clock. So if you have any questions, we've got two folks from our councilwomen here. They're going to come around and collect those, and we'll ask them towards the end of our session. Mike, what are some of the threats that or risks that you see for our public schools?
Well, when I think about the question, I think about the question in the context of being an elected official and specifically being a county commissioner that has a responsibility to fund local schools. And so I see 2 or 3 areas of real concern. Things that have changed just since the time, and I've been I was a commissioner, and full disclosure, I'm not currently a commissioner. I served for 16 years. But during my time, I just saw a real change among elected officials in terms of their attitudes towards public education. Not all elected officials, but a significant percentage, a significant minority percentage, but a very loud minority and a very aggressive minority percentage. There's an interesting public opinion surveys. You get this consistently. You ask a parent if they're satisfied with the schools that their children are attending, and the overwhelming answer is yes. My kids go to great schools. If you ask that same parent about schools generally, public schools generally, they'll say, oh, it's terrible. And the disconnect there between, and it's across the board, the disconnect there is a result of a very well thought out I call it propaganda program, to convince parents that although your school's doing well, we still have all these issues with public schools generally. I've seen in my time as a local elected official, a lot of local elected officials across the state buy into that notion. I kind of got radicalized on this question a year or so ago when I was at an event in Western North Carolina, and I was talking to county commissioners, 3 county commissioners from a adjacent county, talking about, and education came up, uh, and specifically some of the problems of funding, local funding for education, and their response, and they had no problem saying it. We want to starve our system, you know. It needs to be blown up. Public education needs to be blown up. And I've heard that that radicalized me because we went on and then had a very vigorous conversation about it that didn't convince each other that the other side was right. But it was just shocking that on the local level, people who see their local schools can have that opinion and to say it so openly. Now they won't. Most of them won't say it in a open meeting. Most of them won't get on the floor of the legislature and say it, but some of them will. But I know elected officials. Over the years, I've gotten to know so many elected officials all across North Carolina at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level. And I can tell you that the percentage of elected officials who are beginning to subscribe to that view is growing. Still a minority, but it's growing. The way you end that conversation is to say, okay, you blow it up, then what? And there's no real answer to that. But it's not about the answer to it for these people. It's about uh, it gives them meaning in their service to be seen as tough people. So I think that's a real threat. And to follow up, last thing I'll say about it, because I don't want to talk about vouchers yet. I could talk for hours about vouchers, but I think the theme of the first session with Michelle Sanders talking about voting and about up and down the ballot, I think that sometimes people don't understand how important local elected officials are to your public education system. They are so important because they fund it. You know, their funding is the difference between having the resources to do what you need to do or not. It's the local funding that fills in those gaps. And if you have local officials who want to blow the system up, and there's a good chance that you've got at least 1 or 2 in your county that want that, then you need to know that. Again, with something Ms. Sanders said, believe people when they tell you who they are. Believe them. So, and I'll talk about vouchers in another question because I've got things to say.
um, there is a concerted effort in this state, if you didn't know it, to dismantle public education and dismantle public education from 2 aspects. One, of course, is funding. So vouchers, y'all said the dirty word, vouchers, right? The deliberate taking of funds that are public dollars that should go to our public education system and then moving it over to private interests that then the people have no say in. That's a direct threat to our public education system. The promise of Leandro not being fulfilled, the over 30-year-old funding case that we found, our Supreme Court found that North Carolina wasn't living up to its constitutional mandate of a sound basic education for all of our students. And 30 years later, we still can't release all the funds to make sure public schools have what they need to be places where young people can thrive. And then the second part, that dangerous narrative that Leah spoke about, actually becoming legislation that is even more dangerous than the narrative, right? Because the narrative is whispers, it's conversations, but legislation actually changes what can actually be done in schools, and that we are under attack from a bill development standpoint in this state. So public education requires engaged in this process, whether you have children in school or grandchildren in school, or you're a retiree. Like, all of us have to wake up to the threat that is in front of us right now, that's knocking down the schoolhouse door, so that we can stop that threat. And one of the ways to do that is up and down that ballot, for sure. But it's also building our power as people, because we have power to understand the threat that's happening, so that we can stop it and don't allow that threat to come through any longer.
Monica.
But you've all said the same. All said the same. This is what I will say to you: is Wake County did the math and put it on our legislative agenda. Leandro, for one LEA, local education entity, is $1 billion just to Wake County. So put in perspective, when we talk about starving our public school, that is what we're talking about. 200 schools, not enough teachers, not enough principals, not enough IAs, or for me, it was called a TA, teacher assistant, not enough child nutrition workers. Everybody knows about the bus driver shortage. There is not a place, from the moment our children and families touch a school, whether that's if you ride the bus or you go through carpool, the deficiencies are visibly there. So when people tell me that they don't know what I'm saying, when I say to them they are literally dismantling public education, I say to them, drive by a school, volunteer at a school, call a school. Because some of our schools, guess what, also don't have people who can answer the phone, because hiring a receptionist has also gotten really difficult in the public school. Because what we are saying about teachers, people forget, impacts the entire morale of everyone in that building. So when we say, and again, I think, Leah, you put it very well, we talk about teachers in a way that makes them not professional, but yet we all trusted a teacher to somehow get to our profession. And then we legislate that same indoctrination by saying, we don't believe teachers are worth their salt, so we're not going to pay them. We believe that they should have a baby in the summer because that's their summer vacation. I'm married to a teacher. I ain't seen a teacher who don't work 12 months around the year, right? So those are the realities of, it's no longer talk. It is in legislation. It's no longer whispers between people that we agree. They figured out how to have the conversation in a way that you leave like, did they just try to talk me out of public school? Like, the nuances have gotten louder, smarter, and far more pervasive in our communities. So Wake County is a county that has 70% of the people who live here don't have children, but yet our county commissioners invest almost that percentage in our schools. If you look at our building fund as well as what they give us for operations, think about what I'm saying to you, right? The county is paying for the state's job. North Carolina, we have Representative Von Hafen in here. She'll correct me if I'm wrong. Is still one of 8 states who is still a Dillon rule state, which means the state is responsible for our public schools. But I can tell you, if you go to a public school, that is not the case. And you actually, I challenge you, go to any public school's website and look at their budget. Look at it. The numbers don't lie, you all. So when they say that they've raised teacher pay, I'm actually glad. I remember when my husband started teaching in 1996 and made $27,000. I am glad we've raised beginning teacher salary. My husband's now in his 29th year, and guess what? He's been stagnant in his salary for the last 10 years. So when I say to people, that's what I mean by nuance, right? Yes, we raise beginning teacher pay, but that is not across the board. And you heard him say, we have the largest number of nationally board certified teachers, actually North Carolina, and Wake County has more than almost most states, just in our county alone, of nationally board. That's the nuance I'm talking to you about, right? So those are the things that I hope people start to pay attention to, because guess what else you can do? Start on the back of your ballot, vote up and down. You can also debunk these myths in your conversations with the people you know. If we, which is the large majority of people who believe in public schools, when we sit quiet, that silence becomes complacent. Silent isn't a yes, because I work in anti-sexual violence, but it is complacency. So when you don't say to people, hey, I challenge what you're saying to me about this, that's not my experience, which back to Mike's point, when the surveys say, I believe that my daughter's school is a great public school, but I believe public schools are not good, challenge that. Ask them, since your experience is at this school, how do you know these other schools are not good schools, right? Those are small things that you can do every day, because I promise you every day someone is alluding to or saying directly to you something negative about public schools. Why? Because it is the number one political football in this country right now. A public good is the number one political football in our country. So that's why public schools are at stake, because it's not just the loud few who come to Wake County Public Schools, roll the tape, and yell at us about how horrible we are and why their kids don't go to our public schools. But yet you're still yelling at us about our horrible public schools of which you're not in. Right? Hear me say that. You're telling me about something of which you don't experience. That's number one. But it's also the things that we aren't calling out, right? So the quiet majority has got to shift the narrative. And that's my challenge to you. Vote your conscience and what you know to be right. Even if you don't have kids, you know it's a public good and you know it's a public necessity for our community. And then the second thing is, please, I beg of you to be a part of the voice to change the narrative that public schools are strong, or we too will be still talking about the dismantling of public schools a few years from now. And I do believe that the threat is real. I do not believe that this is a veiled threat. It's a real threat. We see it in legislation, we see it in funding, and we see it in the vast number of teachers leaving. Wake County used to be able to go to 50 states and recruit teachers when I came on the school board in 2013. Today, we can barely recruit in our own state. NC State was our largest feeder of public school teachers in Wake County. The pipeline is dried up. You all, those are data points I'm giving you to share with people in conversation about how much of a threat our public schools are in.
Thank you all. We have about 10 minutes left. We got some really, really good questions from you. Unfortunately, we don't have time to address all of them. So I've got two. I'm going to direct them a little specifically here on the panel. And then I want to come back to something Monica was touching on here at the end about what can all of us do to help ensure that our public schools are valued and they remain strong. But Mike, you had mentioned wanting to get into vouchers, and one of the questions we got was what is happening with the private school voucher program and what's happening on that front. So I was going to have you share a little bit more, and anybody else is welcome to jump in, but I thought I'd direct this one a little more specifically.
Leah would actually know more about the technical part of or you would, Jeff, in terms of where it's at. The thing I want to say about vouchers as a local elected official is one thing that I don't think is being talked about enough when we talk about the voucher program is this notion that you're going to be taking local funding away from the public schools, from the local, and let's say in my case, Transylvania County schools. Let's say it's been estimated under this program that we might lose 200 students to private schools. We have about 4,000 students in our system. So people say, well, you're going to lose funding. You won't lose all the funding, but most of the funding will follow the student. So you're losing the funding for those 200 students. And people say, what's the big deal? You're losing the students, so you don't have the expense. So what's the problem here? Well, that is so wrong. That is so wrong. Particularly in our case, in rural counties, you're not losing 200 kids in one grade or even 200 kids in one school. You're losing 200 students across the system. So we're going to have the same number of teachers. We're going to have the same number of buses. We're going to have the same number of classrooms. There will be some variable expense that goes down, but most of your expense will remain the same. All that's going to happen is you're going to lose funding for 200 kids. Now, what's going to happen, and I'm not saying it's going to happen next year, but what is going to happen within 2 years is the local school systems are going to be coming to the boards of county commissioners saying, we have the same expenses, but we have fewer resources. And so you're going to have to cover. In effect, what the legislature is doing is passing a tax on localities, property tax, and forcing county commissioners to fund things that that are now being funded by the state. I think that's wrong. I don't think that it's being talked about enough, but it's a real issue, and I'm telling you, it's coming. And the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners is aware of this issue as well. I think the other thing I'll say about vouchers, not to get into the politics of it, but it's really interesting. I'm also on the board of the Rural Center, the North Carolina Rural Center, and I'm chair of the advocacy committee of the Rural Center. And we've looked at vouchers as an issue. And one of the things that we learned is that in some states, 2 states in particular, Texas and Georgia, when vouchers came up in Texas, it was killed by rural Republican members of the legislature because they saw what I just talked about and the threat that that voucher program placed on rural school systems in Texas. Same thing happened in Georgia for the same reason. Rural Republican legislators stood up and said, no, we're not going to vote for this. And so it did not pass. Now, before you get too excited about that, what happened in both states is those legislators who took that stand then got primaried out of office.
Right. That's right.
And since that time, both those states have passed vouchers, the voucher program, but the principle remains the same. The reason that they voted against it remains the same. And I just wish we could have that conversation here in North Carolina along those lines. So.
Thank you, Mike. And there was an article that came out this week that showed 48% of the private schools in North Carolina are in 10 counties, and most of those are urban and suburban counties. So to your point, our rural communities do not have private schools or have very few private schools. So most of this voucher money is going to be going to the Charlottes and the Raleighs and the Greensboros and not into rural communities. And in addition to that, the money that they're putting into the voucher program, so earlier this year, they proposed adding $625 million more to the voucher program because they've expanded it so that any student, whether you've attended a private school or not, is eligible to expand it. Thankfully, not all of that money became law, but that $625 million, which the state has, could have given teachers an 8.5% pay raise, plus a $1,500 bonus, plus hired 500 more nurses, counselors, social workers, and psychologists for our public schools. And we still would have had money left over, right? And so it's about making choices with what we've got. I'm gonna, since we're getting really close to time, I want to come back to our panel here to say, what is it we can do to help make sure that our public schools remain strong? I know as a public school parent, I would always tell my friends, before you make a decision about where you want your child to go visit your public school first. And almost to a family, they would say, thank you, thank you, thank you. I had no idea because, as Mike said, there's this propaganda out there that our public schools are bad. Go visit them first. But Letha, I want to turn it over to you. What is it that folks in this room can do to help make sure that our public schools remain strong?
First, recognize, right, through your own actions that it's a necessity. So even if you're not directly impacted by public schools, that if you're not a parent, if you're not a grandparent, invest in our public schools. That means show up to volunteer at your local public schools. There always is a need within an individual public schools for support. Show up to your school board meetings. Go learn what's really happening in our public schools. Talk to your county commissioners, talk to your elected school board officials. Better yet, talk to your legislators, the ones that are actually supposed to represent us, but are making decisions that undermine public education. Go show up at their doors, knock on them, come sit in their office and tell them why you believe public education is great and should be adequately and excellently funded in this state. And then join groups like mine. We have the pleasure of co-leading a statewide coalition called Heal Together North Carolina. And one of our campaigns is Public School Strong, where we are training just regular old folks to understand how to come together as a group, show up at your school board meeting, make public support of public schools to drown out some of the dangerous and loud minority narratives that show up on a regular basis, because apparently they don't have anything else to do with their time but to show up and be evil. I'm just lay it out there. So join with like-minded folks in a group to show up in support of our public schools and vote, and get your family to vote and your friends to vote for public school champions that are on the ballot this year.
Thank you. We have about 3 minutes left, but Leah?
Absolutely. Have you ever like looked online at restaurant reviews and like if you had like a bad experience at like a restaurant or an airplane or whatever, people like write all about it and like give you the whole narrative. Like they usually don't do that for the positive one, right? How about we shift the narrative and we share the great things that are happening in public schools every single day? Like we can do that work simply. And I think that there's like just like as a parent, as a human, I think I can't change the world. I can't do it all, right? Every small action is changing the world for somebody. You shouting out a teacher, you might not have changed the world, but you changed their world that day, which is enough, right? Find ways to promote public school and support it any way that you can. We're just always so grateful for that, on top of everything that was already said.
Yeah, 30 seconds. I can't overemphasize the importance of talking to local elected or to your elected officials. And on the local level, if possible, to go to a meeting and talk. I mean, in Transylvania County, at literally every school board meeting, there are 2 or 3 members of Moms of Liberty who will come and talk about things and say at the beginning of their comments, this is not happening in Brevard, but, and say things. And when elected officials only hear that, it makes it really easy to discount other perspectives. So that's important.
Thank you. Monique, I'll give you the last word.
So you've already heard us say vote, volunteer. You can also substitute. We've talked about the vacancies in our schools. That's a great way to really for yourself see what's happening. But again, I think the biggest thing you can do is shift the narrative. As much as I hate to put the name of the organization in the room that he just noted, they have done something that I challenge us to do, and that is organize around one message: public school strong. We already have the message. We just need to organize around the message. If we showed up in all 115 LEAs at a school board meeting, we already know what the outcome is. They are dismantling public education, and we have the ability to rebuild a better and brighter public schools. So we should organize. I challenge you, one school board meeting, you, your friends, make a list and take turns.
We are the majority. We need to make our voice heard. Let's give it up for our great panel today. Two quick housekeeping things. First, at this table up here at the front is an excellent free book from EdNC, Education North Carolina, a media group that does a lot of work on public schools, called North Carolina's Choice: Why Our Public Schools Matter. It's wonderful stories and articles about great things happening in our public schools and why they're important in our communities. Feel free to come up and take one. Second, lunch is our next event, and lunch, the buffet line is going to be in room 2A and 2B, which I believe is on the other side of the main hall. So you'll go around, pick up your lunch in that room, and then bring it back to the main room, room 1, to eat. And we'll have lunch and then our speakers at lunch. So thank you again for coming.